Okay, so today I'm going to try to give you a four-step approach to learning how to play over chord changes. I'm using the 2-5-1 progression as an example. That backing track is on YouTube. You can find it. It says it's called 2-5-1 in all 12 keys or something like that. Roman numerals 2, 5, and 1. So the way that I approach stuff like this is the way that I was taught. It's the way that I'll teach you. First step is to use your arpeggios, or those are your chord tones, which I've written out here. So if it's a D minor chord, the chord tones are D, F, A, and C. They appear all over the neck. So learning your inversions, learning just where those four notes are everywhere. Alright, that'll be really helpful. Do the same for G. Do the same for C major 7. Now also look at common tones, because a helpful thing to note is that D and F appear in the first chord. D and F appear in the second chord. G and B appear in this chord. G and B appear in the next chord. So as you're changing through them, so if you're going like, you only have to change 2 of those notes to do a new arpeggio. Then you only have to change 2 of those notes to do a new arpeggio. So common tones that are common from one chord to the next, really helpful. And then you look at your shifting tones, common tones, shifting tones. All right, so the first approach would be either put on a track, or depending how comfortable you are with it, just find where the notes are so that you can at least do arpeggios of each chord. So really slow, just eighth notes, however you want to approach it. Get the idea? So there were a couple of other things thrown in there, but most of that was straight arpeggios. So get comfortable with that. Know where your inversions are. Know how to play the chords in all different areas. So that's chord tones, also known as arpeggios. The next thing is chord scales, also known as the modes. So the good thing about this progression is it's all in the key of C. So all your chord scales and modes are basically all the white notes on the piano. So a mode just really means to play the scale, play the C major scale, but play it from the chord that you're on, or the scale that you're starting from, the root note here. So we're going to play C major starting from D, C major starting from G, and then C major starting from C. So that's a Dorian mode, Mixolydian mode, and Ionian mode, if you want to use the fancy words. So, D Dorian, G Mixolydian, C major. You'll find those everywhere on the neck. One can go up, one can come down. Okay, so now you have 2 approaches. If you don't want to go any further just yet, if that's all a lot of information, just practice those 2 approaches. And that gives you a cool starting point, because now you can like do one chord as an arpeggio, do the next one as a mode, flip backwards and forwards, like, so you can go modal approach, arpeggio approach, modal approach, arpeggio, scale, arpeggio, that kind of thing. All right, so just it's really fun. It's a good, good way to understand the fretboard and not see chords as just being down here, which is like when we play chords, it tends to be all down here, but they're everywhere. All the notes are everywhere. All right, so get your grip on that. When you feel like that's starting to make sense, the next thing you can look at is chromatic or passing tones, or like that's when you can start adding all those different weird modes that I talk about. Like on your G7, you can do your G altered, G diminished, G whole tone, like the tension and release, a concept that I talked about on the other video. You can look at this progression. It's in the key of C, right? It doesn't get to C until the end. So you can think of this as, what were the words for it? Subdominant, dominant, and tonic. So like a bit of tension. This one wants to go somewhere. It wants to go home, but in between that we're going to go dominant, and dominant really wants to go home. All right, so like you can think of this progression, if you want to think of it in non-musical terms, as tension, tension, release, resolution. All right, so chromatic passing tones, if I was attacking this, G7 is where I'd really like want to add a bit of color and a bit of tension. All right, so ways to do that. First thing you can do is, one of my lessons was called chromatic approach notes, right? So take all your arpeggios, and instead of just playing them straight, approach each note from a semitone below. So something like, that was the D minor 7 with chromatic approach. So instead of, you've got, so it's really just thinking of those, but just sort of like creeping into them. But it starts sounding like pretty interesting. Do the same with the G7. Up here. All right, do the same to C major. Instead of, there's a good symmetrical C major shape. So instead of, you're going to go, all right, so think about those three approaches. Then you can give yourself little exercises, do one as a chord arpeggio, do the next one as a modal scale run, do the next one with chromatic passing tones. And what gets cool to like mix them up is to change directions and things like that. So you can just think sort of directionally, like, all right, I'm going to go down. When I say down, I might be pointing down, but the pitch might go up because of the way guitar's laid out. So we can go down the neck on a D minor, back up the neck on a G, altered, and I don't know, resolve on a C. That's bringing in the next concept, actually. So polyphonic, different to monophonic, is playing multiple notes at the same time, poly. So guitar is one of those instruments that can do single note lines and multiple note lines. And I've also written substitute chords. So just because D minor is playing doesn't mean that you need to be playing D minor all the time. So just if we've got an example, the bass player's doing D, right? D up the top can be anything from that scale. So that's substituting or overlapping, whatever you want to call it, like putting one chord over another just to create, something interesting, some more tension, some more dissonance, whatever you're after. What's that song sound like? Jimmy Page, so he knew all about substituting chords over a pedal tone. Cashmere. So just that sort of thing, like just different. If D minor is being played, you can say that you've got a 24 bar solo, okay? So you've got a lot of ground to cover. Some of the time you might want to really acknowledge D minor, but then some of the time you might want to go somewhere else with it. So, you know. So anywhere on the neck that you spot those notes, you can put two of them together at the same time. You can put three of them together. You can overlap, you know, say instead of playing D minor with a D bass, E minor with a D bass, F with a D bass. I've talked about that in another lesson, like slash chords. And then some of the chords are not really traditional chords, just like stacking fourths and fifths on top of each other, just like looking for just little patterns that sound good. You know, that's like a power chord pattern shape. I like stuff that has like a little bit of that dissonance crunch in it, like putting notes that are a tone apart but on separate strings or a semitone. I mean, you could spend your whole life just getting to know those things. Like it's infinite. But adding a little bit of polyphonic, because sometimes you hear a solo and it's just all single notes. So just for something different, because we can on the guitar, you know, why not? Just break it up a little bit. You can split it up between strings too, some of the stuff that I like. Especially if you're like a chicken picker like me, because that technique is really designed for splitting strings. Skipping strings, sorry. Octaves. Just playing the same note an octave apart, that's a big Benson thing. So that's polyphonic without really being polyphonic, because it's the same note, but there's two of them. Alright, so there's 4 approaches there. You can spend so much time getting to know all of them, any of them. And hopefully that'll give you like some methods that you can attack this stuff with, alright? Good luck.